Australia and New Zealand share a joint food standard setting system that ensures food sold in both countries is safe and suitable for human consumption. This is the Australia-New Zealand Food Standards Code. In Australia, the states and territories enforce code through their own state and territory laws. In New South Wales, this is the Food Act of 2003 and the Food Regulation 2015. Other states and territories deliver this through their own food acts. For example, Victoria has the Food Act of 1982 and Queensland has the Food Act of 2006. Serious offences related to the sale of food are consistent across all states and territories and provides a level playing field for food businesses nationwide. These offences are sale of unsafe food, sale of unsuitable food, misleading conduct in relation to the sale of food, including advertising, sale of food not complying with purchaser's request, for example, allergenic declarations made by the consumer, sale of equipment of packaging and labelling materials in a way that may render food unsafe, non-compliance with a provision of the Australia-New Zealand Food Standards Code, and false description of food. This section is designed to provide an overview of the core offences food handlers and proprietors need to be aware of when working in New South Wales. The New South Wales Food Act of 2003 requires all food businesses operating in New South Wales, whether large-scale manufacturers, major supermarkets, fast food chains, local cafes or home-based food businesses, to comply with the Australia-New Zealand Food Standards Code. The code consists of 4 chapters that cover mandatory requirements for food safety, food identity, that is, prescribed names for certain foods, and food labelling wherever food is sold. 2 chapters of the code are very important for food safety supervisors. Chapter 3 describes requirements for food businesses generally, retail food handler skills and knowledge, food handling controls, health and hygiene requirements, cleaning and sanitisation requirements, and animal and pest controls for food businesses, Standard 3.2.2. Standard 3.2.3 of the Code relates to food premises construction and food transport vehicles. Chapter 1 describes food handling requirements. Food safety supervisors should also be familiar with provisions for food identification, names and addresses of suppliers, and allergen descriptions. Food Act 2003. The New South Wales Food Authority enforces the code through the Food Act of 2003 and the Food Regulations 2015. The Food Act 2003 defines the offences all food handlers must avoid when working with food. The Food Authority has agreements with the New South Wales local councils to share food law compliance and enforcement across the state. Local councils are the primary enforcement agency for food retail and hospitality businesses. The offences food handlers and food businesses must be aware of are covered in Part 2 of the Food Act of 2003. Other parts of the Act support compliance and enforcement activities of the Food Authority and local councils, including food safety schemes for licensed businesses, kilojoule labelling information, and the powers of authorised officers to enter and inspect premises. Part 2 is divided into 2 divisions, serious offences and other offences. At the end of the module, there are also 2 other offences important for retail food businesses. Division 1, serious offences relating to food. Division 1 offences are, as the name suggests, the most serious offences for mishandling food and can attract prison sentences. These laws are designed to protect customers against food being sold that is a known risk of causing food poisoning and intentionally falsely described food. These matters are referred directly to court for prosecution, and guilty verdicts include criminal conviction recordings. The presiding judge will determine the appropriate penalty. If you are convicted of a Division 1 offence, it will stay on your criminal record for 10 years, and you and your business will face fines of tens of thousands of dollars. You could even be sent to prison. These offences are handling food in an unsafe manner, Section 13, sale of unsafe food, Section 14, and false description of food, Section 15. Handling and sale of unsafe and unsuitable food. The first 2 offences concern handling food intended for sale in such a way that the food handler knows, or should reasonably be expected to know, that handling and selling it in this manner will make the food unsafe. Handling is a catch-all term for all manner of methods of preparing food, including cooking, chilling, cutting, or otherwise changing the food. The Food Act 2003 defines food as unsafe if it is likely to cause physical harm to a person who might consume it even if properly processed, such as cooked, but includes an exemption for allergen sensitivity that is not common in most people. In the event of a prosecution, an offending business may likely be charged with both Section 13 and Section 14 offences because the Act separates handling and sale. Either way, the food business and the food handler are in serious trouble. The New South Wales Food Authority Prosecutions webpage provides examples of recent court prosecutions and charge sheets. If you explore the website, you will find businesses sometimes receive multiple convictions under the Food Act of 2003, and often multiple convictions for the same offence. For example, one charge per implicated food item for the same business, depending on what the Food Authority or local council officers found during their investigation. False descriptions of food. Section 15.1 is about truth in the sale of food. This offence is primarily aimed at ensuring businesses truthfully describe foods they sell. Where this is very serious is if consumers are harmed because of incorrect information about the foods they purchase. For retail and hospitality workers, this is very important for things like allergen management. Food safety supervisors need to take care food handlers are aware of the ingredients in the products being sold, so as not to falsely describe food they are selling. Another issue that may trigger a Section 15 conviction is where the business does not remove stock for sale that has been recalled. Often this includes recalls for undeclared allergens such as dairy. Knowingly selling or using a food subject to a recall is a very serious breach. Division 2. Other offences relating to food. Unlike in Division 1, Division 2 offences do not require proof food handlers knew what they were doing was wrong. The maximum penalties are not as harsh, but it means the offence only must be proven to warrant enforcement action. The Food Authority or local council does not need to prove food handlers knew what they were doing would make the food unsafe, or they were selling unsafe food. Division 2 offences are usually not contested in the courts and instead receive fines or penalty infringement notices. The following offences are contained in Division 2. Handling and sale of unsafe food, Section 16. Handling and sale of unsuitable food, Section 17. Misleading conduct relating to sale of food, Section 18, sale of food not complying with purchasers' demands, Section 19, sale of unfit equipment in packages or labelling material, Section 20, compliance with Food Standards Code, Section 21, and false descriptions of food in Section 22. A business will not avoid a fine for not knowing the food was unsafe or unsuitable. Regardless of whether the food handler knows the food is unsafe, customers eating unsafe food are likely to suffer physical harm, including potential hospitalisation or even death. These offences can apply to both the individual food handler and the business, so it is important for all staff in the business to be aware not to sell unsafe food. The food safety supervisor should put in place procedures to ensure all staff know what to do if they suspect a food product is unsafe. Unsuitable food. Unsuitable food means food that is rotten, spoiled, or otherwise damaged, or contains a biological or chemical material that is foreign to the nature of the food, or a contaminant. The Food Act of 2003 definition also includes criteria for meat from animals that is not slaughtered properly or is diseased. It is important to always check food in the kitchen prior to the use to confirm that it is not rotten or spoiled. Remember, unsuitable food is not necessarily unsafe, but may cause harm to your customers. Misleading conduct. Misleading conduct includes misleading advertising, labelling, and packaging, whether verbal, printed, or digital. It captures instances where the product or food handler makes claims about the nutritional or health effects, or the product contains undeclared ingredients or ingredients in different quantities to what is advertised. Authorised officers can and will take samples to ensure products contain the described energy and nutrient amounts, or ingredients if they suspect a business is substituting ingredients or making false claims about foods they sell. Food handlers are not usually responsible for labelling packaged foods, but must ensure they are able to respond to customers' questions about products accurately. Sale of food not complying with purchasers' demand. This offence is a little more complex than misleading conduct. Its broad generality is designed to capture sales where products are similar but not the same. Examples include selling substitute cuts of meat, a sirloin instead of a ribeye, or using alternative ingredients due to a shortage, caged instead of free-range eggs in a quiche. Food handlers must declare changes to the standard product in such instances. Sale of unfit equipment, packaging, or labelling material. This offence is about the need to ensure food is sold in food-grade packaging. Poor or unsuitable packaging can lead to food becoming contaminated by chemicals in the packaging, leaching into food. It is important that food is sold in food-grade packaging materials. If you are concerned about the quality of packaging used, ask the owner of the business to confirm that the packaging is food-grade. While this offence is likely to cause an issue for stock controllers, food handlers should ensure items like paper and plastic containers are suitable for hot food or are microwave safe. Compliance with Food Standards Code. This clause is very important. Its section gives legal power to the Food Standards Code in New South Wales and is the most common conviction for food businesses who are fined or prosecuted for food safety breaches. The Food Standards Code contains requirements for many types of food and labelling. Food handlers and food safety supervisors should be particularly mindful in the requirements listed in Standards 3.2.2. Food safety practices and general requirements and Standard 3.2.3, food premises and equipment. These two standards outline food safety requirements for people working in food businesses, including health and hygiene responsibilities. Key examples of compliance concerns with Standards 3.2.2 include food processing control failure, Clause 7 of Standard 3.2.2, food display control failure, 2-hour, 4-hour rule, Clause 8 of Standard 3.2.2, health and hygiene, Division 4 of Standard 3.2.2, and cleaning and sanitation, Division 5 of Standard 3.2.2. False descriptions for food. Section 22 is a good example of how laws operate to add clarity about a word or function mentioned elsewhere in the Act. This section provides a list of all of the times food can be falsely described and applies to the offences listed in both Sections 15 and Section 18. A product only needs to meet one of these criteria to potentially meet the definition of false description. Other laws. Notification. Section 100 of the Food Act 2003 requires all businesses selling food in New South Wales to notify the relevant enforcement agency. For businesses requiring an FSS, including home-based businesses, this is usually the local council. Appointment of a food safety supervisor. Section 106C specifies the owner of a food business must appoint a food safety supervisor. There must always be at least one food safety supervisor appointed to the business operations. However, a food business has 30 working days to replace a food safety supervisor if the appointed person leaves the business or their certificate expires.